Karen kicked my elderly dad's cane as a joke. She didn't know he was a retired FBI agent. Part 1. You never forget the sound of someone you love falling. It's not the crash or the thud, it's the silence that follows. The kind of silence that screams. That day, my father didn't cry out when he hit the pavement. He didn't need to, because I'd already seen what she did, and I'd already started walking toward her. My name's Jason Hale. I'm 36, a cybercrime consultant who usually works behind a screen. But this story isn't about me. It's about my father, Robert Hale, a retired FBI field supervisor, 3-time unit citation awardee, and the quietest man you'll ever meet. He served 29 years in the Bureau, took down cartel cells, uncovered interstate rackets, and trained entire squads in behavioral interrogation. He survived a car bomb, testified before Congress, and once talked a suicidal banker off a ledge in under 5 minutes. These days, he spends his mornings reading Civil War biographies and his afternoons tending to his vegetable patch, or he did, until the woman across the street kicked his cane. We had just moved him into Alder Ridge, a picturesque little cul-de-sac with American flags on every porch, and a community so manicured it looked fake. Dad didn't ask for much, just a place with a ramp, wide sidewalks, and neighbors who didn't treat him like he was already gone. We thought Alder Ridge would be that place. Then we met Karen Worthington. She introduced herself on move-in day with a clipboard in one hand and a glare in the other. "I'm the president of the Alder Ridge Residential Cohesion Committee," she said, voice clipped like a report. "If you need help adjusting to the regulations, let me know." My dad nodded politely. "Didn't know there were regulations for watering tomato plants." She blinked. "Well, it's not about the plants. It's about image. We have to maintain a standard." Dad said nothing. I should have known then this wasn't a welcome. It was a warning. The first infraction showed up 3 days later. Unauthorized use of non-standard walking cane on communal path poses safety hazard. It was signed Karen Worthington, ARC president. Dad looked at it, then at me. Then he laughed. Didn't know I needed clearance for being old. We ignored it. Then came the noise complaint because Dad listened to jazz records on a Bluetooth speaker out back. Then the garden citation because his tomato stakes lacked aesthetic cohesion. But he never complained, not once, until Saturday. It was the first warm weekend in months. Dad wanted to sit on the front bench under the oak tree with his copy of Truman and a cup of mint tea. I stayed inside, catching up on case notes. I looked out the window and saw him smile at a little boy riding past on a tricycle. Then I heard a sharp, shrill voice. "Karen." I walked out the front door just in time to see her stride across the sidewalk toward Dad. She pointed at his cane, his worn, black-handled, brass-tipped cane, and said something I couldn't hear. Then she kicked it, hard. The cane slid across the sidewalk like a hockey puck. And my father, my war-tested, badge-carrying, never blinked in a standoff father, collapsed sideways with a grunt. I froze for half a second, then ran. She laughed. She laughed. It was a joke, she barked, raising her hands. Maybe if he didn't use it like a trophy, step back. I growled. She didn't. So I did what I hadn't done in 10 years. I flipped open my wallet and showed her my father's old credentials, his gold retired FBI badge. Her face drained like a sink. "You just assaulted a federal agent," I said coldly. "Retired or not. That's a felony." I didn't know she stammered. "I don't care." I helped Dad sit upright. He was shaking but alert. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "She kicked the cane." "She did. Report her." We filed a report with local PD that night, included the Ring camera footage. You could see the kick, hear the laugh, watch the cane spin like a thrown baton, but the officer on duty hesitated. "She runs the HOA. Might be hard to push charges." I leaned forward. "There is no HOA. It's not registered with the state." I checked. It's a fake entity. Everything she's done, every letter, every fine, every infraction, it's all fraud. He blinked. I gave him the badge number on file. Not mine. My father's. Within the hour, a detective was assigned. The story hit local news by Monday. Elderly man assaulted in alleged HOA dispute turns out to be retired. FBI supervisor, fake HOA president accused of targeting disabled residents for noncompliance. And suddenly, neighbors started talking. An older woman from 2 doors down, Miss Grace admitted, Karen fined her for putting excessively large pumpkins on her porch. Another neighbor showed me a $75 noise infraction because her son practiced violin after 6 p.m. The pieces clicked. This wasn't about community standards. This was about power. And Karen, she had built a fake kingdom, one she ruled through fear, shame, and phony citations. But now she'd messed with the wrong man. That night, Dad handed me a worn brown file. Inside were names, notes, patterns. He looked at me and said, "She thinks this is the first time I've taken down a petty tyrant with a badge. Let's remind her what the real ones look like." Part 2. Dad always kept his files old-school folders, annotations, color-coded paper clips. 29 years in the Bureau will do that to you. Digital left a trail, he said. Paper showed who really cared. Now, those habits were about to expose Karen Worthington, because when he handed me that folder after she kicked his cane, it wasn't just a stack of grievances, it was an investigative blueprint. Inside were records he'd gathered quietly over the past 6 weeks. Neighbors had mentioned things offhand, and Dad, being who he is, started listening between the lines. He kept dates, timelines, descriptions of the citations, and most damning copies. Karen had left copies of her so-called violation notices in several mailboxes, none of them legitimate. Dad kept them all. Violation: improper use of assistive devices on walkways. Noise alert, brass music above acceptable frequencies. Porch decor, non-compliance, decorative gourds, exceed quantity limits. 3 max. Each signed Karen Worthington, Alder Ridge Residential Cohesion Committee. None of it had legal standing. The ARRC, not a registered HOA, not a civic body, not even a nonprofit, just a name, a logo she made in Canva, and a woman with a printer and a grudge. "Why didn't you tell me you'd been tracking her?" I asked him that night. Dad shrugged, sipping black tea. His fingers were still sore from the fall. Didn't want to cause waves. Figured I'd let her dig her own hole. Just didn't think she'd kick me in the process. I started connecting the dots, using the badge number I still had access to through Bureau legacy credentials. I reached out to former colleagues, ADA attorneys, and a few state housing compliance officers. In 3 days, we found 8 more families in Alder Ridge who'd been targeted by Karen. A deaf couple fined $500 for installing a front door camera with blinking lights. A Latina single mother cited for unauthorized religious symbols after hanging Dia de los Muertos artwork. A Korean war vet told his hanging laundry line violated drapery ordinances. None of these fines were legal. All were intimidation. We filed a class action civil complaint. Dad's testimony led the charge. I followed it up with the technical audit, every forged template, signature discrepancy, even metadata in the PDFs Karen distributed that revealed she'd copied actual city documents and altered them. I caught her leaving the same timestamp on 2 different violation notices filed weeks apart. Sloppy work. But predators don't expect their prey to read the fine print, especially not when the prey turns out to be an FBI veteran and his son trained in digital forensics. By the end of the week, our attorney received a message from a man named Russell Denton, Karen's former HOA vice president. He wanted to talk. We met him at a diner in town, 2 booths away from the back wall. He looked like a man unraveling, fidgety, remorseful, eyes darting at every sound. "She told me it was just for show," he said, "that if we didn't have rules, the wrong people would move in." "What does that mean?" I asked. He hesitated. "You know what it means." He handed me a USB stick. Inside were draft versions of citations, internal emails titled non-compliant profiles, a spreadsheet labeled targeted residents. My father's name was on it, so were 5 others we recognized, each with categories: age, deviations, public image risk, Enforcement urgency. Karen had built a system not for safety, not for community, but for purging the neighborhood of anyone who didn't fit her image. And now we had proof. The next morning, we held a meeting on our front lawn. I knocked on every door on the block. So did Dad. We told people the truth: you've been lied to, fined illegally, harassed under a fake system by a woman with no authority. But it's over. We're taking her down, and we need your help. 42 people showed up. Some brought their own citations. Some brought stories they'd never told before. One woman cried, "I thought it was just me." Dad stood at the center of the circle and said, "You weren't weak. You were targeted. And now, we stand together." That night, I filed the class action complaint to the State Housing Board. We attached every file, every recording, every forged letter. The story hit the state wire service within hours. Fake HOA president accused of harassing elderly and disabled residents victim. Was former FBI agent Karen didn't come out of her house the next day. She didn't come out for a week, but the state attorney's office did, and they were very interested in the folder on our kitchen table. Part 3. There's a distinct shift that happens when someone realizes the illusion of power has shattered. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with silence from their camp. Then the doors stop opening. Then the phones stop ringing. And then the knock at their door comes not from a neighbor, but from the state. That's what happened to Karen Worthington. The interrogation didn't take place in a dark, windowless room. It was conducted right here in Alder Ridge at the community center she used to lock with a padlock she claimed was standard protocol. Now, it was unlocked. Now, we had the keys. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be, but Dad was. He wore his old suit, not the one for funerals, the one for testifying in courtrooms that held terrorists and white-collar monsters. His cane was polished, his back straight. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like the closer. Karen sat across from a housing enforcement officer, a state prosecutor, and an ADA civil investigator. I was told her demeanor was casual at first, defensive, evasive. I only wanted to maintain community standards. I never forced anyone. The documents were suggestions. But then they showed her the spreadsheet, the targeted residents list, the emails, the folder from Russell Denton. She blinked. Once, twice, then folded. Outside. I stood with neighbors waiting in hushed clusters. The buzz wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. Karen emerged an hour later, escorted by a state investigator. No handcuffs yet, but her face was ashen. She didn't look like the HOA queen anymore. She looked like someone exposed. She refused to make a statement, so the prosecutor made one for her. We are opening formal proceedings for housing fraud, civil rights violations under the ADA, harassment, and impersonation of a governing body. We will be seeking both civil and criminal penalties. That night, I reviewed the transcripts. The part that haunted me wasn't her denial. It was her motive. I didn't want this place to change. I saw what happened to the last neighborhood. Too many renters. People stopped mowing their lawns. You let one thing go and soon everything falls apart. The prosecutor asked, "So you made a list of people you considered disruptive?" Karen's reply. "I made a list of risks." That's when I understood. Karen wasn't just cruel. She was afraid. Afraid of difference. Afraid of change. Afraid of a world where people like my dad, old, limping, proud, and unafraid, could still command a presence without bending to her control. But fear is no excuse. And the law agreed. The state filed 9 formal charges against Karen, including fraudulent representation of legal authority, targeted harassment of protected individuals, elder abuse, distribution of falsified legal documents, operating an unlicensed HOA entity. The class action suit gained 10 new plaintiffs overnight. ADA advocacy groups backed our case, and Alder Ridge it flipped. The neighborhood voted to formally dissolve any future community committee unless elected by majority vote and overseen by county ordinances. Karen's kingdom was gone. One afternoon, I found Dad back under the oak tree, same place where she'd kicked his cane. I sat beside him. No words, just breeze and memory. After a while, he said, "She thought I'd forgotten who I was." "Did you?" I asked. He looked down at the scar on his hand from a gunfight 30 years ago. Smiled. "No, I just got quiet." That's when I realized this was never about revenge. It was about identity. Karen wanted people like my father to disappear. Instead, he reappeared. And now her silence was permanent. Part 4. When a kingdom falls, it doesn't crumble with fanfare. It splits in silence brick by brick, lie by lie, until the foundation rots and the people who once bowed their heads finally look up and say, "No more." That was Alder Ridge, and Karen Worthington's fake empire. It was finally collapsing. The trial opened in early spring. It was held in county court, a modest stone building framed by dogwoods just starting to bloom, eerily peaceful for the storm that was about to unfold inside. We arrived as a family, Dad in his suit and tie, me in a blazer, and a cluster of neighbors behind us, people who once feared Karen, now standing with posters, statements, letters in hand, victims of her fines, her intimidation, her cruelty. But today, they were witnesses. Karen walked in like a shadow of herself. No clipboard, no oversized sunglasses, no smug air, just a beige pantsuit and a tight-lipped stare, like someone who knew the storm was already here and was trying not to drown. The courtroom was packed. Local news lined the back wall. People whispered her name like it was both a warning and a curse. The prosecution opened hard. They laid out the facts with surgical precision. Karen operated a fraudulent HOA with no legal standing. She issued unlawful citations to over 30 residents. She targeted disabled, elderly, and non-white homeowners disproportionately. She physically assaulted a retired federal agent, and she did all this under the guise of maintaining standards she invented. Then they showed the list, the non-compliance risk registry, and finally the video, the moment she kicked Dad's cane. The jury didn't flinch. Karen did. The defense tried the usual tactics. She was misinformed. She was passionate about the neighborhood. She didn't know Mr. Hale's status. She meant no harm, but it didn't hold, not against the truth. Then Dad took the stand. The room shifted. No anger, no revenge, just calm, relentless clarity. He told them about the first citation, the garden warning, the jazz complaint, the moment she kicked the cane. Then he paused and said, "She tried to make me invisible, but I didn't serve 3 decades protecting this country just to be erased by a woman with a printer and a power complex. I wasn't afraid of her, but I knew others were. So I stood up because someone had to remind her what actual authority looks like." When he stepped down, the room stayed silent for several seconds. Then someone clapped, then another. The judge banged her gavel. But the message had landed. Karen's reign was over. Witness after witness told their stories. A mother of 2 who had been told her wheelchair ramp violated facade cohesion. A black teacher who received a $100 fine for a Juneteenth banner. A Navy veteran who was cited for flagpole overextension. One neighbor wept on the stand. "I almost sold my house. I thought I didn't belong." But now they were reclaiming it. Together, the verdict came quickly, guilty, on all counts. The judge's sentencing was swift and brutal. "You impersonated authority. You preyed on the vulnerable. You used fear as currency. You are hereby sentenced to 18 years in state prison with no possibility of parole before year 12. You will pay full restitution to every resident you find illegally. And you are permanently barred from holding any position of leadership, compliance, or neighborhood oversight in this state ever." Karen said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared like she couldn't believe the clipboard was gone, like she never expected us to fight back. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Neighbors hugged, strangers shook hands, and my dad. He just stood by the oak tree again. Same one he fell under. But this time, he was standing. Part 5, when the gavel dropped and Karen was led away. Alder Ridge didn't erupt into celebration. It sighed, the way a tired body does after surviving an illness. A release, not triumph, not vengeance, just peace. But peace is a fragile thing, so we decided to protect it. The first meeting of the newly formed Alder Ridge Neighborhood Council took place 2 weeks after sentencing. No clipboards, no self-appointed presidents, just folding chairs on the lawn, pitchers of lemonade, and every voice welcome, whether you walked in on 2 legs, rolled in on wheels, or came leaning on a cane. Dad didn't speak right away. He sat quietly, listening. But when someone asked, "How do we make sure this never happens again?" he stood, and he said, "You start by never giving power to someone who demands it. You give it to those who serve, and you check everyone, even the good ones, especially them." From that day on, we built a new system, a real one. No fines without vote-backed approval. All bylaws had to pass ADA compliance review, quarterly community forums with anonymous reporting, and rotating leadership to prevent Karen syndrome from ever taking root again. We called it the Hale Rule. Any rule you wouldn't explain to a child, a veteran, or a widow, don't enforce it. News outlets followed the story into its final chapter, not for drama, but for change. We became a model neighborhood, one of the first to be officially certified by the State Housing Equity Board for inclusivity, transparency, and anti-harassment protection. Our story made it into textbooks, civil rights law journals, even a mini documentary called The Man with the Cane. But Dad, he didn't care about the fanfare. He just wanted to sit under his oak tree again. And he did every morning, cane in hand, newspaper on his lap. Neighbors waved. Kids brought him cookies. He never gave speeches. He gave presents. And that was enough. I returned to work eventually, but something stayed with me, a fire I hadn't felt since college. Since the first time I saw my dad walk out of court after testifying against a cartel and thought, that's what strength looks like. Now I saw it in the way he moved, a little slower, sure but no less certain, and the way others moved around him, not in fear, but in respect. On his 70th birthday, the neighborhood unveiled a bronze plaque at the base of the oak tree. It read, "Robert Hale, Protector of Peace." He stood when they tried to knock him down, so we could all rise stronger. He tried to protest, but he was crying too hard to finish. So I stepped in and read the rest. Power doesn't come from a badge. It comes from the people who never stop showing up. Alder Ridge changed, not just the rules, the culture. New neighbors arrived, a family with a daughter in a chair, a single father with a therapy dog, a retired school teacher with a rainbow flag over his porch. No one found them. No one cited them. They were welcomed. And every so often, someone would walk by Dad's bench, ask to sit, and whisper, "Thank you for standing up." He always smiled, tapped his cane once, and nodded. Karen remained in prison. She filed 2 more appeals. Both were denied. No one visited her house. Eventually it was sold, renovated, and now a young couple with twins live there. They turned the front porch into a play area. No sign, no clipboards, no fear, just life. People often ask what justice looks like. I used to think it was courtrooms, sentences, headlines. Now I know better. It's quiet. It's a neighborhood where people laugh again. It's a garden that blooms without permission. It's a man with a cane sitting under a tree and knowing he belongs. To anyone living under the weight of someone else's clipboard, to anyone who's been told their difference is a violation, to any family who's ever been fined for being exactly who they are, stand up. Even if your hands shake, even if your knees wobble, because sometimes standing up doesn't just change your life, it changes the standard forever. The Sedron, so surrender to